People think the loudest thing on a range is the rifle. It isn't. It is the silence that comes right after somebody realizes they were wrong about you. I know that silence the way some people know a song. I can find the first note of it in a crowded room. I heard it clean and whole one morning on a range that did not belong to my branch, in front of 30 strangers who had spent the last 10 minutes deciding I was a joke. Let me take you there. But not the way it happened. Let me take you to the after first, because the after is where I still go when I want to understand it. It is a cold morning, weeks later. First light. The line is empty, the targets pulled, the flags limp on their poles. There is a new placard bolted to the base of the control tower, small and brushed steel, and it names a man who has been dead for 3 years. I am standing at the rail with one hand flat on the cold metal, and there is no one here to see me do it. The gunnery sergeant who ran this range that day is gone now, transferred to a schoolhouse 2 states away, and the relay runs a little differently because of what happened between us. I did not ask for that. I would have let it go. But some corrections take root whether you plant them or not. I stood there a long time that cold morning, then I let myself rewind to the day it broke, because you cannot understand the quiet at the rail without the noise that earned it. The day it happened, I was early. I am always early. It is not a virtue. It is a habit I built out of a fear I never fully talked myself out of, the fear of arriving to find that the thing had already started without me. By noon that day, a battalion of soldiers would move on a word I had not yet given. Fuel, ammunition, a road march, a boundary handed off from one unit to another in a place a long way from that quiet green range. All of it waited on me and on a short flight that would carry me from this range to a command post I had not seen yet. So I was early, and I was quiet, and I was dressed like nobody at all. Command does something to the way you sit in a chair. I did not know that until I had it. You would think the weight of 600 people would make a person heavier, and it does, but not the way you would guess. It does not press down. It pulls in. Everything you feel gets pulled inward and held there, because the people who work for you read your face for weather, and if your face says storm, they batten down for a storm you may not even mean. So you learn to keep your face flat. You learn to keep your hands still. You learn to arrive early and sit quiet and let nothing show, and after enough years of it, the stillness stops being a performance and becomes the actual shape of you. That morning, I had 3 things on my mind, and none of them were the range. I had a fuel status that was 40% short of where it needed to be by dark. I had a company commander 2 time zones away who had lost a soldier to a training accident the week before and was not sleeping, and I could hear it in his voice on every call, and I did not yet know what I was going to do about it. And I had the handoff itself, a boundary between 2 units in difficult country, the kind of thing that goes smoothly 99 times and then the 100th time somebody dies because 2 lieutenants pointed at the same hilltop and each assumed the other owned it. Those were my 3 things. I turned them over on that bench the way you turn stones in your pocket, and I waited for an aircraft, and I let a Marine Range NCO believe I was a wife who had wandered too close to the guns. I have thought since about how much of the trouble in this world comes from people needing to be seen correctly, right that second by strangers who owe them nothing. I felt none of that need on the bench. I had 600 people who saw me correctly. I did not require a 31st. That was the first mistake, if you want to call it a mistake. I was not in uniform. I had come off a red-eye and a long drive, and I had a plain range shirt on, gray, no markings, and canvas pants and boots that had seen better decades, and a ball cap pulled low. My hair was in the same regulation bun it is always in, but under a cap in gray light, with sunglasses hanging off my collar, I looked like exactly what the gunnery sergeant decided I was. A woman who had wandered somewhere she did not belong. I sat on a bench near the pad with a duffel at my feet and a hard rifle case across my knees, and I waited for an aircraft. I checked my watch, which is a watch and not a phone, because I have found that a phone invites the world in, and a watch only tells you the time. The range worked in front of me, a known distance course laid out long and clean toward a berm the color of old bread, and I watched it the way you watch weather. Relays formed and fired and broke. Brass caught the light. The smell of it came to me on the wind, cut grass and gun oil, and the flat mineral bite of powder, and it undid something in my chest that I keep tied down most days. There are only a handful of places on this earth where I am not a lieutenant colonel. A firing line is one of them. On a firing line, I am 21 again, or I am 19, or I am some ageless version of myself that predates rank and command and the whole heavy apparatus of being responsible for other people. The rifle does not care what you command. The wind does not salute. The target keeps its own counsel and reports only the truth, and there is a mercy in that so deep I have never found the bottom of it. Everywhere else in my life, the truth is contested. Everyone has a version. On the range, there is only one version, and it is punched in paper at the far end of the grass, and no amount of rank or volume or certainty can argue with it. The man whose range this was understood that better than anyone I ever met. His name is going on that tower now, and I will tell you about him properly in a moment, but I want you to hold this first, because it is the key to the whole morning. He believed that a rifle was an honesty machine. He used to say that you could learn everything you needed to know about a person by watching them shoot a bad string. Not a good one. Anyone can be gracious about a good string. He wanted to see what you did with the flyer, the round that went wide, the one that was your fault. Did you blame the wind? Did you blame the rifle? Did you blame the light? Or did you take a breath and own it and put the next one back in the center where it belonged? That was his whole philosophy of people, worked out over 60 years and 100,000 rounds. And he taught it to me one afternoon when I was too young and too angry to know I was being handed the thing that would carry me through the rest of my life. So when I say the smell of that range undid something in my chest, understand that it was not sentiment. It was closer to homecoming. I had come to say goodbye to the only man who ever taught me anything that mattered in the only chapel he would have recognized, which was a stretch of mowed grass with a berm at the end of it, and the wind, reading left to right. I had a reason to be at that particular range. The placard I told you about was not there yet on the day it happened. But the man it would name was already in the ground, and this was his range, the one he had built the marksmanship program at before a bad road and a worse day took him. Master Sergeant, retired by then, but never retired in the way that matters. He had taught me to shoot when I was 21 years old, and certain the whole world had already made up its mind about me. He died on a wet road 3 years before that morning, in a truck, doing something ordinary, which is how most of the people who survive the extraordinary end up going. He had walked away from things that should have killed him a dozen times over a long career, and then a patch of standing water and a guardrail took him on a Tuesday afternoon 4 miles from his own house. I got the call in a parking lot. I remember exactly where I was standing. I remember the light. There are a handful of phone calls that split your life into a before and an after, and that was one of mine. And I stood in that parking lot and did the thing he taught me, which was to find the pause and breathe and not let the shot go wide, because I had a battalion that could not afford for me to come apart in a parking lot. And so I did not come apart in the parking lot. I came apart later, privately, on my own time, the way he would have wanted, and then I put myself back together and went back to work. The marksmanship program he built outlived him, which is the only kind of immortality most of us get and more than most of us earn. His students are scattered across every branch now, teaching the still place between heartbeats to their own students, most of whom will never know the name of the man the lesson came from. That is how it is supposed to work. The lesson matters more than the name, but the people who run that combined range knew the name, and they decided to put it on the tower, and when I heard they were doing it, I asked if I could be there, and they said yes, and that is the entire reason I was on a bench in a gray shirt on the morning a gunnery sergeant decided I did not know one end of a rifle from the other. I had a borrowed rifle in that case, and 5 rounds in my pocket, and my only plan was to send those 5 downrange in his memory during a lull, and then to get on my aircraft and go do my job. A quiet goodbye. Nothing that needed an audience. The 5 rounds were not arbitrary. He and I had a thing about 5. A match string is often 5 or 10 rounds, and he used to say that anybody could get lucky once, but 5 in a row told the truth about you. When I was on the service rifle team, he would set me a 5-round problem the way another man might set a crossword. Cold bore, no warmers, 1 string, and then he would read the group and read my face and tell me which of the 2 had lied. Usually it was my face. The group almost never lied. So 5 rounds for him was not a number I picked. It was a sentence in a language only the 2 of us spoke, and I meant to say it once more, quietly, into a berm on a Tuesday, and then close the book. The rifle in the case was his. That matters to the rest of this, so I will say it plainly. When he passed, he left the match rifle to me. Not the hunting rifles, which went to his sons, and not the money, of which there was almost none, because he had spent a career being the kind of man who is rich in every way that does not fold into a wallet. He left me the match rifle, the one he had built himself over a period of years, betting the action on his kitchen table with the patience of a monk, and there was a note with it in his dry handwriting that said only, "You will know when." I had carried it in its case for the better part of a year, waiting to know when. That morning, standing on the grass he had loved, with his name about to go on the tower. I knew when. I had not planned to fire it in front of anyone. I had planned to wait for the range to go cold and empty, and to send 5 rounds into the middle of a target with nobody watching but me and the ghost of a dry old voice telling me to stop yanking the trigger. Plans, as he also used to say, are just a list of things that have not gone wrong yet. I found the range officer in charge before I did anything, because you do not step onto another service's line without asking. Not ever. Not if you have any sense at all. He was an Army captain named Lorne Hartley, on loan to the combined training cell, young and careful, and he came down off the tower ladder when I raised a hand. "Help you, ma'am," he said. He had the flat courtesy of a man who says ma'am to everyone and means nothing by it yet. "I'm hoping to beg a favor," I said. "There's a name going on this tower soon. I knew him. If you get a lull between relays, I'd like to put 5 rounds downrange for him and be out of your way." Hartley studied me for a second. I had not given him my name, only a story, and a story's a hard thing to check. But he was a shooter himself. You can tell. Shooters have a particular stillness around the eyes, a way of measuring distance, even when there is nothing to measure. "You a shooter, ma'am?" he asked, not unkindly. "I've sent a few," I said. He almost smiled. "I've got a new arrivals relay on deck," he said. "Give me 20 minutes to run them through, and I'll square you a spot on the end. Sign the range log at the tower. Ackerman will get you eyes and ears." I signed the log with my initials, SC, and the date, and nothing else. I told myself it was humility. It was probably something closer to armor. I have spent a career learning that the less people know about you at the start, the more honestly they show you who they are. I did not plan what happened next, but I did not exactly prevent it either. Let me pull back from that bench for a moment, because you should know who was sitting on it. I was 43 years old that morning and a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, and I commanded a battalion, which is roughly 600 human beings, and the machines and the promises that come with them. I say that not to impress you. I say it so you understand the size of the gap between the woman on the bench and the woman the gunnery sergeant thought he saw. He saw a lost dependent, a wife killing time, a civilian who had drifted too close to the firing line. What he could not see, because you cannot see it, was 25 years. He could not see a specialist at 21, or 2 deployments, or the nights I did not sleep because 600 people were mine to bring home. He could not see the small silver badge that says Distinguished Rifleman, which is not a thing you buy or a thing you are given. It is a thing you bleed for over years, a handful of leg points at a time, until the country decides you are one of a very small number of people who can genuinely, provably, shoot. None of that was visible on a bench in a gray shirt. That is the whole point of the story, really. You cannot read a person's life off their posture at a firing line. People try anyway. They try all the time. The strange thing is that the same skill that made me a shooter made me a commander, and almost nobody understands that, because they think shooting is about the hand and command is about the mouth. It is not. Both of them are about the pause. On the rifle, the pause is the still place between heartbeats where you break the shot. In command, the pause is the half second between the thing that makes you afraid and the thing you say out loud, and everything important lives in that half second. A radio call comes in bad. A convoy is late and not answering. A young voice on the net is climbing toward panic. Every soldier on that frequency is listening to you, not for information, but for weather. And if you can find the pause, the still place, and speak from inside it, calm and slow, you can walk 24 frightened people back from the edge with nothing but the temperature of your own voice. I learned that on a firing line before I ever learned it in a command post. Hollis Ward taught it to me as marksmanship. It turned out to be leadership wearing a different coat. I have used it in places I will not describe in detail, because they are not mine to hand out as color for a story. But I will tell you one thing about a bad night some years ago. On a deployment, when a vehicle went off a road it should not have been on, and the first reports were the kind of reports that make your stomach drop. Everyone on that net was climbing. I could hear it, the pitch rising, the sentences getting shorter and faster. And I found myself doing the exact thing Ward had drilled into a shaking 21-year-old. Slow the breath, find the pause, break the shot clean. I keyed the handset and I made my voice as flat and unhurried as a man reading a grocery list, and I gave 3 instructions, one at a time, with a beat between each, and I felt the whole net come down off the ceiling and get back to work. Everyone came home that night. I'm not telling you I saved them. Their own training saved them. But the temperature of the net was mine to set, and I set it low. And I set it low because of an old master sergeant and a rifle and a lesson about the still place between heartbeats. That is who was sitting on the bench in the gray shirt. Not a wife, not a tourist, a person who had spent a quarter of a century learning to be quiet on purpose in the exact places where being loud gets people killed. I want to reach back further because the morning at that range was not the first time someone measured me by the smallest version of myself, and it is important that you know it was not new. It was very old. It was in a way the oldest thing I own. I was 21 years old, a specialist, at a competition range on a base I will not name. I had been shooting for 2 years by then, and shooting well, and I had talked my way onto a relay for a match that was, by custom and by nobody's actual rule, mostly men. I remember the weight of the rifle and the smell of the same 3 things, grass and oil and powder, and I remember the range NCO who came down the line, looked at me, and jerked his thumb back toward the spectators. "Off the line," he said. "This isn't a ladies' event." I was 21. I did not have the composure I have now. I had a face that showed everything, and it showed the sting of that, and I started to gather my gear because I did not yet know that you were allowed to say no to a man with stripes when he was wrong. And then a voice came from behind both of us. An old gravel voice, a master sergeant's voice, a voice that had clearly been watching. "Son," the master sergeant said, "put her back on the line." The NCO turned. "Master Sergeant, this is a—" "Put her back on the line," the old man said again, slower, and there was no heat in it, which is what made it terrible. "Then go stand where you can watch, because you are about to learn something, and it is rude to learn with your back turned." His name was Hollis Ward. He had a face like a dry riverbed, and hands that had done everything at least once. He put me back on the line that day, and he stood behind my right shoulder while I shot, and afterward he did not tell me I had done well, because he did not believe in telling people things they could feel for themselves. He told me instead that I had a natural pause between heartbeats, a place where the whole body goes still for a fraction of a second, and that most people spend their lives fighting that pause, and I should learn to live inside it. Then he told me to report to the service rifle team, and he made it happen, and he changed the entire shape of my life with about 9 sentences and a refusal to let a wrong thing stand. I want to stay in that year a moment longer, because the morning at the combined range does not make sense without it, and because I've noticed that people tell the story of the day they were finally seen and skip the years of not being seen that gave the day its weight. I shot the rest of that match. I did not win it. I came in somewhere in the middle, which for a 21-year-old specialist against a field of seasoned competitors was, Hollis Ward informed me later, not embarrassing. That was the highest praise he handed out to beginners. Not embarrassing. He said it the way other men say prodigy. And then he did the thing that actually changed my life, which was not the speech and not the match. He wrote my name down. He found my first sergeant, and he made a phone call. And 2 weeks later, I had orders to report to a marksmanship unit that I had not known existed and would never have been brave enough to ask for on my own. That is the part people miss about being championed. It is rarely the grand gesture in the moment. It is the quiet paperwork afterward, the name written down, the call made, the door propped open by someone who did not have to bother. The team was harder than anything I had done. I was surrounded by shooters who had been shooting since before I could read, men and a few women who could do things with iron sights that I did not believe were physically possible until I watched them. And for the first 6 months, I was, by a wide margin, the worst shooter on the roster. Ward did not coddle me about it. He told me flatly that I was the worst, and then he told me that being the worst on that particular roster still made me better than 99 of every 100 people who ever picked up a rifle, and that I should let both of those things be true at once and get to work. So I did. I earned my points, a painful handful at a time, the way you earn the Distinguished Rifleman badge, in sanctioned matches, against real competition over years. Leg points, we called them. You need 30. I remember the day I pinned on the badge better than I remember my own commissioning. Ward was there. He did not smile. He looked at the little silver badge, and he looked at me and he said, "Now the hard part. Now you have to be worth it." And he walked off to go yell at some other kid who was yanking the trigger, and that was the entire ceremony. And it was perfect. He is the reason I commissioned. He is the reason I stayed in when I had one boot out the door in my late 20s, tired and underpaid, and certain the institution would never fully make room for a woman who could outshoot most of the men in it. He talked me off that ledge with the same tool he used for everything, which was the flat refusal to let me tell myself a smaller story than the true one. "You are not leaving because they will not make room," he said. "You are thinking about leaving because it is hard, and hard is not a reason, it is just the weather. Do not confuse the weather for the reason. I stayed. I made room. 20 years later, I command a battalion, and I still hear him call it weather every time it gets hard. Some corrections you carry forever. I carried his. I was carrying it that gray morning at the combined range, in a rifle case across my knees, with 5 rounds in my pocket for the man who gave it to me. So you understand now why I did not stand up and announce myself. It was not a trap. I was not lying in wait. I simply did not think it mattered, and I had spent a lifetime learning to let the target do my talking, and I had a plane to catch. The new arrivals relay ran long, the way they always do, and while it ran, I watched the man who was about to make a mistake. Gunnery Sergeant Boyd Trask was good at his job in the way that a certain kind of man is good at his job, which is to say competent and loud and utterly certain that competence and volume are the same thing. He was a Marine, in camis, with the rank on his collar, and he moved down his line, correcting grips and calling out cadence with a showman's timing. The new arrivals loved him. That is the trap of a man like Trask. He is genuinely entertaining, and the entertainment makes the cruelty feel like part of the act. So nobody stops it, because stopping it would be like heckling a comedian. I watched him for a full 20 minutes before he ever noticed me. And in that 20 minutes, I built a fairly complete picture of the man, because building complete pictures of people quickly is most of what my job actually is. He was good on the fundamentals. His safety brief was tight, and he meant it. And when a young Marine flagged the line with a muzzle for half a second, Trask was on him instantly, hard and correct, no theater in it at all. That told me something true about him. Underneath the showman, there was a professional who cared whether people went home with all their parts. I have known a lot of loud men who were hollow behind the noise. He was not hollow. That is exactly why what he did next disappointed me, instead of merely annoying me. A hollow man cannot help himself. Trask could have. He ran the new arrivals through their first string, walking the line, and his corrections were sharp and useful and delivered at a volume that carried to the parking lot. You are choking that rifle like it owes you money. Loosen up. Let it float. Breathe, Devlin. You are holding your breath like you are underwater. That is why you are stringing them vertical. Good coaching, real coaching. The kind that makes new shooters better, wrapped in a comedian's timing so the sting lands soft. If he had spent his whole morning doing that, I would have finished my quiet goodbye and gotten on my aircraft and never learned his name. And he would never have learned mine. And both of us would have been the poorer for it in ways neither of us would ever have known. But there is a thing that happens to a certain kind of performer when the material starts to run thin. He goes looking for a fresh laugh, and the easiest fresh laugh in the world is a stranger who cannot fight back. He found me on the bench, and I watched him decide, in real time, that the lost woman in the ball cap was the next bit. I have watched men make that decision 100 times. There is a particular brightening in the face, the small hunger of a person who has just spotted an easy target for a joke. I felt it land on me like the shadow of a bird crossing the grass. Staff Sergeant Ackerman felt it too, and Ackerman was smarter than his boss in the specific way that quiet men are often smarter than loud ones. He was watching me instead of performing at me. He had clocked the hard rifle case, which is not a thing lost wives carry. He had clocked the boots, which were not new and not cheap and were laced the way a person laces boots they have worn in hard country. He had clocked the stillness. Ackerman could not have told you my rank, but every instinct he had was quietly informing him that his gunnery sergeant was about to step on something, and I watched him open his mouth twice to say so and close it both times. Because you do not correct your gunnery sergeant in front of a new relay unless the building is actually on fire. He did not yet know the building was on fire. He would. He saw me during the 3rd string. I felt it. You develop a sense for the moment a room decides to make you the joke. A small pressure change, like a door opening somewhere behind you. He was walking back up his line, and his eyes went to the bench and stopped, and I watched him build the bit in real time. A woman, civvies, a ball cap, a rifle case she was probably holding for her husband. He grinned, and he pitched his voice for the whole relay to hear. "Ma'am, you're a little lost," he called. "Ladies' fun day is Saturday." A few of the new arrivals laughed, because you laugh when the gunny makes a joke. That is simply physics. I didn't answer. I looked at him the way you look at weather you have already decided to wait out. That was, I think, what he could not stand. Silence is a challenge to a man who lives by noise. He came a few steps closer, playing to his crowd, thumbs in his gear, and he tipped his chin at the rifle case. "That's a real rifle in there, sweetheart, not a curling iron," he said. "You know which end the loud part comes out of?" More laughter, bigger now. There was a young lance corporal on the end of the line, a kid named Aubrey Fenn, who laughed the loudest because she was new and frightened and wanted to belong, and I did not hold it against her then, and I do not now. That is what belonging costs you sometimes. You laugh at the thing you are secretly afraid you are. Captain Hartley was up in the tower and had not heard it, or had not heard all of it, and Staff Sergeant Neil Ackerman, Trask's assistant, a quieter man who ran the radio in the log, had heard all of it and was watching me with a small frown, the frown of a man who senses that the ice he is standing on is thinner than his boss believes. Here is where the ground shifted, though almost no one on that range felt it move. Ackerman's radio crackled. He turned half away and keyed it, and I saw his shoulders change. I could not hear the words at that distance, but I did not need to. I know the shape of that particular call the way I know the silence I told you about. Somewhere out past the berm and the tree line, a helicopter was in the air, and it was mine, and it was inbound, and a young staff sergeant had just been told a call sign that meant a full colonel, or better, was about to land on his range. "Say again, inbound call sign," Ackerman said into the radio, quiet, and then he said, "Roger, 10 mics." And he looked at the bench where I sat, and then he looked at his gunnery sergeant, who was still building his joke, and I watched a very uncomfortable arithmetic begin behind the staff sergeant's eyes. Up in the tower, Captain Hartley lowered his binoculars. He had glassed the bench, the way a careful officer glasses everything, and something in the set of the woman on it, the stillness, the case, the initials in his own range log, had connected to something else. He came off the ladder fast, boots skipping rungs. 2 men on that range now knew the ground had moved. Everyone else was still laughing at a gunnery sergeant's joke. Trask, riding the wave of his own performance, decided to close the bit the way showmen do, by pulling the mark up onto the stage. "Tell you what," he announced, turning to his relay, spreading his arms. "Let's give the boys a little demonstration. Ma'am, come on up. We'll get you behind a real rifle. Show the boys how the other half lives." I could have said no. I want you to know that. There is a version of that morning where I stay on the bench and my aircraft lands, and Trask never learns a thing, and I get on the bird carrying the same small ember of anger I carry 100 other days, and never let become a fire. That version's fine. That version is what discipline is for. But he had picked up my rifle case, he had walked over and lifted it off the bench, still grinning, and he was holding it out to me like a prop, and the case had a name stenciled on the inside lid that he had not looked at, and inside it was a rifle that a dead man built. And I found in that moment that I did not want to make myself small in front of that rifle. Not that one. Not for this. So I stood up. "All right," I said, "since you're offering." I took the case from him. I set it on the bench and opened it, and I will tell you that my hands were steady because Hollis Ward had spent an afternoon in 2004 teaching a shaking 21-year-old how to make her hands stop, and the lesson had never once failed me since. The rifle came out of the foam. It was a match rifle, heavy and honest, glass on top, a rifle with more careful hours in it than most marriages. A couple of the new arrivals stopped laughing when they saw it, because even brand new troops know the difference between a toy and a tool, and that was a tool. "Gunnery sergeant," I said, and my voice was level and it carried, because command teaches you to fill a space without raising your volume. "Which target is open?" He blinked. The script had gone off the rails somewhere, and he had not noticed yet. Lane 9's cold," he said. "But ma'am, you don't have to—" "Lane 9, I said, and I walked to the firing point. I want to slow down here because the next 90 seconds are the reason you are listening to me at all, and I do not want to rush them the way the world usually rushes past the moment a person is finally seen. I went down behind the rifle, the way you go down into cold water when you have done it 1,000 times. Without drama, without hesitation, one motion. The bench, the sling, the cheek weld, the buttstock in the pocket of the shoulder that has held it so many times it has worn itself a home. The world narrowed, the way it always narrows, the crowd fading to a gray edge, the wind coming up the range and speaking to me in the language Hollis Ward had taught me to hear. I read it off the flags and off the mirage shimmering over the grass. A light left-to-right push, nothing a good shooter would even chart. I set my dope. I found the target in the glass, a black circle sitting patient at the far end of a very old game. I could hear him while I did it. Not really, I want to be clear. I am not telling you I hear voices. But the way a musician hears a teacher counting time under a piece they have played 10,000 times, I heard Hollis Ward under the whole sequence, his dry running commentary from 100 afternoons. "Quit muscling it. The rifle knows the way. You are just steering. Do not chase the wobble. Let the wobble happen. The wobble is not the enemy. Panic is the enemy. Front sight. Front sight. Nobody in the history of the world ever missed because they looked too hard at the front sight. And under all of it, the one he said most, the one that is carved into me below the level of language, breathe out and shoot in the quiet at the bottom of the breath. That is where the pause lives. Not when you are full of air and full of yourself, but at the bottom, when the lungs are empty and the body has nothing left to do but be still for one honest second. I did not think about the 30 people behind me. I did not think about the joke, or the rank, or the aircraft that was, unknown to me, already beating its way in over the tree line. I thought about the front sight, and the wind reading gently left to right, and the empty quiet at the bottom of the breath, and a dry old voice counting time under a piece I have played 10,000 times. And then I found the pause, the one he told me to live inside, that small, still place between one heartbeat and the next, where the reticle stops breathing and the whole loud world holds its tongue. I broke the first shot into it. I did not look at the target after. A good shooter calls the shot from the recoil and the reticle, not from the hole, and I had called it center before the sound reached the firing line. I cycled and settled and found the pause again and broke the second, then the third. There is a rhythm to it that has nothing to do with hurry, a metronome set by your own body. And I was inside it now, and the range had gone quiet around me. That first thin edge of the silence I love, and I sent the fourth, and I sent the fifth, and I came off the trigger and lifted my cheek from the stock, and the whole world came flooding back in. For a second, nobody said anything at all. Then a spotting scope down the line, in somebody's hands, found Lane 9's target, and I heard Lance Corporal Fenn, the kid who had laughed the loudest, say in a small, stunned voice, "To no one, to everyone, That's one hole." It was not quite one hole. It was 5 rounds in a group you could have covered with a closed fist at that distance, a ragged black flower dead in the center of the circle, and to a brand new Marine who had spent the morning learning how hard it is to keep just one round in the black, it might as well have been witchcraft. The relay crowded toward the scope. Trask did not. Trask stood very still a few feet behind me, and when I rolled up off the firing point and turned, I watched the grin die on his face by degrees. The way a fire dies, not all at once, but in stages, until there is only the cold shape of where it was. He opened his mouth. I do not know what he meant to say. He never got to say it, because that was the exact moment the sky arrived. You hear a black hawk before you understand it. It comes as a pressure first, a deep beat you feel in the sternum before the ear sorts it into rotor blades. And then the sound resolves and the wind changes and the grass lies down in a great flattening wave as the aircraft flares in over the tree line and settles onto the pad 30 yards from the firing line. Dust and cut grass went everywhere. Everyone on that range turned toward it, the way people always turn toward a landing aircraft. Some ancient part of the animal brain, sitting up to watch the big thing come down. The side door slid back. A major stepped out under the turning blades, ducking the way you duck, and he was in uniform. And everything about him, the creases, the carriage, the way the range parted for him without being asked, said staff officer, said command, said, "This is a man who works for someone important. His name was Trent Bellamy, and he was my operations officer, and I had known him for 3 years and trusted him with more than I trust most of my family." He crossed the grass in that fast, bent-over walk, and he found me standing at the firing point with the dead man's rifle in my hands. And he came to a stop and straightened up, and his hand came up in a salute that had nothing performative in it at all. "Colonel Corbett," he said, pitched to carry over the rotors, and there was the smallest apology in it, the apology of a man who knows he is interrupting something and cannot help it. "We're wheels up in 5, ma'am. The handoff moved. They need you forward." I heard the word colonel land on that firing line like a dropped plate. I returned Bellamy's salute. "Understood, Major," I said. "Give me 60 seconds." Behind me, I heard Trask's clipboard. I did not see it. I heard it, the small plastic clatter of a thing going slack in a hand that had forgotten it was holding anything, and I heard the relay behind me rearrange itself into a different posture entirely. 30 young Marines coming to a kind of attention that no one had ordered, the involuntary straightening of people who have just understood, all at once, exactly how wrong they were, and exactly how long they had been wrong out loud. I have been given salutes in ballrooms. I have had rooms of important people rise when I entered. None of it has ever landed the way that unordered silence landed on a Marine range at 9 in the morning, 30 kids going rigid because the joke had a rank, and the rank was mine. I want to describe that silence precisely because it is the thing I told you about at the very beginning, the loudest thing on a range, and you deserve to hear it done justice. It is not the silence of a room that has been ordered quiet. That silence has a floor under it, the low hum of people waiting to be released. This was the other kind. This was the silence of a large number of people all doing the same piece of arithmetic at the same moment and all arriving at the same answer, which was, we were wrong, and we were wrong loudly, and there is no taking it back. You can hear that realization move through a crowd. It has a sound, or rather it takes the sound away in a wave, starting nearest the thing that caused it and rolling outward. The Marines closest to me went still first, then the ones behind them, as the word colonel traveled back through the relay in urgent whispers, sailor to sailor, soldier to soldier, until it reached the ones at the far end who had not even heard the original joke and now stood at a rigid attention, triggered by nothing but the posture of everyone in front of them. Lance Corporal Fenn, the one who had laughed loudest, had gone the color of paper. She was staring at me with the specific horror of a young person who has just understood that the thing she did to fit in was the exact wrong thing, and that she did it to someone who could, if she wished, make the rest of her enlistment a memorable experience. I caught her eye for just a second, and I gave her the smallest shake of my head, the one that means it is all right. You are new, I was new once, let it go. I do not know if she understood it. I hope she did. She had done nothing that a frightened 20-year-old does not do a dozen times before she learns better. The person I had business with was not the girl who laughed. It was the man who taught her that laughing was safe. Here is the part I am least proud of and most sure about. I did not enjoy it. I have watched people wait their whole lives for a moment like that one, the moment the room finds out, and I understand the hunger. But standing there with Hollis Ward's rifle in my hands and Bellamy's aircraft turning behind me, what I felt was not triumph. It was a kind of tiredness, and underneath the tiredness, something almost like grief. Because I knew this feeling. I had been the 21-year-old on the other side of it, and I did not actually want to make Boyd Trask feel the way that range NCO had once tried to make me feel. I only wanted him to see. There is a difference, and the difference is the whole of what my life has taught me. Trask found his voice. To his credit, and I do give him this, he did not make excuses. He came around to my front and he stood at a rigid parade rest, and his face had gone the gray of the berm. Ma'am, he said, I didn't know. I would never have. Ma'am, I am sorry. That was out of line. I know, I said. That was rather the point. I did not say it cruelly. I want you to understand the tone because tone is everything here and text can flatten it. I said it the way you say a true thing to someone you have decided not to destroy. He had assumed he could read my whole life off a bench and a ball cap, and he had been wrong in a way that was now impossible for him to unknow. And the not knowing was the lesson, and I let the lesson be the whole of it. I broke the rifle down and settled it back into its foam, unhurried, while an aircraft waited on me. Because Hollis Ward would have broken his own rifle down unhurried if the president himself were tapping a watch, and some habits are load-bearing. I closed the case. Then I did the thing I had actually come to do, the thing all of this had nearly made me forget. I turned to Captain Hartley, who had reached the line by then, breathless, mortified, a young officer watching his range come apart in slow motion. Captain, I said, thank you for the lane. Those 5 were for the man whose name is going on your tower. He taught me to shoot. I saw the understanding move across his face. He'd have liked this range, I said. It's a good one. Your gunnery sergeant runs a tight line. I meant that last part. It was true. Trask ran a tight, safe, competent line, and I was not going to let one bad joke erase it, because I have made bad jokes, and I have been wrong out loud, and a person is not the worst thing they said at 9 a.m. to a stranger they misjudged. Captain Hartley tried to apologize on Trask's behalf, which was decent of him, and also unnecessary, and I stopped him gently. Captain, I said, you gave me a lane, and you ran a safe range. You have nothing to apologize for, and neither does your range, and I would be grateful if this did not turn into a week of paperwork for a man who tells a bad joke. There is enough real trouble in the world. Let this one stay small. He looked at me like a man who had been braced for a storm and handed an umbrella he did not need. I have found that mercy confuses people more than anger does. Anger they expect. Anger fits the shape of the moment. Mercy does not fit, and it leaves them standing there holding a feeling they do not have a name for, and in my experience, that nameless feeling teaches more than any dressing down ever could. I could have made it a storm. I want to be honest with you about that, because it would be easy to tell this as a story about how graceful I am, and grace that costs nothing is not grace. It is just having a good morning. I had, in that moment, real power over Boyd Trask. I could have called his sergeant major. I could have made a phone call of my own that would have followed him for years. I could have stood there and let 30 new Marines watch me take a man apart with the same quiet voice I used to call him a bad net. And some part of me, the 21-year-old part, the part that still remembers gathering her gear off a competition line while a man with stripes smirked, wanted exactly that. Wanted it badly. I felt the want move in me like a current under ice. I did not do it. Not because I'm a saint. I am not. I did not do it because Hollis Ward's rifle was in my hands. And Hollis Ward had spent an afternoon in 2004 teaching a shaking girl the difference between the thing you feel and the thing you do. And it seemed to me that the truest way to honor him, on his own range, with his own rifle, was to feel the whole ugly want, and then set it down, and choose the other thing. So I set it down. It is the heaviest thing I set down all year, and nobody on that range even saw me do it. Then I handed the rifle case to Trask. He did not understand at first. "Ma'am?" "Muzzles down, actions open, it's clear," I said, which is a shooter's way of handing another shooter a rifle, the ritual courtesy of a safe transfer. "Hold it a second while I get my bag." And I watched Boyd Trask, gunnery sergeant, hold a dead master sergeant's match rifle with both hands in the particular careful reverence of a man who has just remembered that he does not, in fact, know who is standing on his line ever, and had better start assuming that every single one of them is carrying a whole life he cannot see. I shouldered my duffel. I took the case back from him and thanked him by name, Gunnery Sergeant Trask, because a name is a small dignity, and I had no interest in taking his. And I walked toward the aircraft where Bellamy waited, and Chief Warrant Officer Reese Vance sat at the controls with the patient boredom of every pilot who has ever waited on a colonel. I passed close by the tower on the way. The placard was not there yet, but the spot was, the raw bolt holes drilled and waiting, and I put 2 fingers against the cold metal where the name would go. Just for a second, just long enough. 5 rounds, old man, I thought. Center. You'd have called it lucky and made me shoot 5 more. I felt the old grief and the old gratitude braid together, the way they always do. And then I ducked under the blades and climbed into the aircraft and put on the headset, and the range fell away beneath us, small and green and quiet, 30 people still standing where I had left them. I did not look back for long. There was a battalion waiting on my word, and the word could not wait on my feelings. In the aircraft, Bellamy handed me a folder and a headset, and the morning turned back into the morning I had actually been having. The fuel status, the boundary, the company commander who was not sleeping. Bellamy is a good operations officer, which means he had already solved 2 of my 3 problems before he ever got on the bird to come find me. And he walked me through his solutions over the intercom while the range shrank to a green thumbnail beneath us. He did not ask about what he had walked into. He had seen the whole tableau, a colonel at a firing point with a match rifle and a Marine range gone rigid around her, and he is far too smart to ask a commander to explain a thing like that. He simply folded it into the long list of things he had seen me do and moved on to the fuel. But at one point, somewhere over the tree line, he keyed the intercom and said without looking at me, "Good group, ma'am." And I said, "Center." And he nodded, once, and went back to the fuel. And that was the entire conversation we ever had about it. And it was exactly the right size. I thought about the handoff. That was the real work. The thing all of this had been a 15-minute detour inside of 2 units, a boundary, difficult country, and the 99-to-1 chance that somebody would die because 2 young leaders each assumed the other owned a hilltop. My job for the next several hours was to make sure the 100th time did not happen on my watch, and I did it the way I do everything, by finding the pause and being quiet on purpose in the places where being loud gets people killed. We landed. I took the handoff. It went smoothly, all 99 parts of it, and nobody died, and by dark the fuel was where it needed to be, and the company commander had heard my voice long enough to sleep a little, and the range and the gunnery sergeant and the ball cap were a small green thing far behind me. That is the truth about moments like the one at the firing line. They feel enormous while they are happening, and then the actual work of your life closes back over them like water. Let me sit with the cost of it, though, because I told you at the start I still go back to the after, and this is why. Being right is not the same as being whole. I have won that particular exchange more times than I can count, the exchange where someone decides I am nothing, and the truth arrives to correct them. Every time, there is a version of me that wants to plant a flag in it. And every time I remember the 21-year-old gathering her gear off a competition line because a man with stripes told her she did not belong, and I remember that the thing that saved her was not a bigger man crushing a smaller one. It was an old master sergeant who refused to let a wrong thing stand, and who did it without heat, and who taught her that composure is not the absence of anger, but the mastery of it. I did not want Boyd Trask small. I wanted him changed. There is a world of distance between those two wants, and I have spent my whole career trying to live in the second one and stay out of the first. I will tell you what it costs, because nobody ever tells you what it costs, and I think the not telling does real harm. Composure is not free. It is not a personality trait you either have or lack. It is a muscle, and like any muscle, it is built by loading it past what is comfortable over and over for years, and it aches. Every time I stand in a moment like the one at that firing line and choose the quiet thing instead of the loud thing, I am spending something. I am eating the anger instead of handing it to the person who earned it. And anger you eat does not simply vanish. It goes somewhere. You carry it. Over a career, it adds up to a considerable weight, and there are nights it is heavy, and the people who admire the composure almost never see the ledger behind it. They see a calm woman on a range. They do not see the 25 years of swallowing that made the calm possible, or the private cost of all that swallowing. I say this not to complain. I chose it, and I would choose it again, and it has made me able to do a job that matters to 600 people. But I want you to know that when I tell you to stay composed, to let the target answer, to walk away without planting a flag, I am not telling you to do an easy thing. I am telling you to do a hard and expensive thing and to do it anyway. Because the alternative, becoming the very person who once tried to make you small, is more expensive still. That is the actual trade. It is not composure or nothing. It is composure or slowly turning into the thing you hate. When you put it that way, the price of the muscle stops looking so bad. Hollis Ward knew the price. I understand that now in a way I did not at 21. All those flat corrections delivered without heat, all that refusal to gloat or crow or make anyone small, that was not a man who did not feel things. That was a man who felt everything and had simply decided, decades before I met him, which of those feelings he was going to hand to the world and which ones he was going to carry himself. He carried a great deal. I only understood how much at his funeral, where a very long line of people I had never met told me very quietly that he had done for them the exact thing he had done for me, and not one of them had known about the others. He had championed a small army of us, one at a time, each of us believing we were the only one, each of us handed the still place between heartbeats by a man who never once told us he was carrying anything at all. Weeks later, the placard went up. I know because Trask sent me a note. He tracked down my command through the training cell, which took some doing, and he wrote a short thing on a plain card in blocky, careful handwriting, and I will not quote all of it because some of it was his and belongs to him. But he wrote one line I have kept. He wrote, "I tell every relay now, on the first day, before we ever go hot, you never know who is on your line. Thank you for the lesson, ma'am. I'm sorry it took a lieutenant colonel to teach me a thing I should have already known." I folded the note back into my breast pocket the first time I read it, and I have moved it from uniform to uniform since, the way I move Hollis Ward's lesson from range to range. That is how the good things travel. Hand to hand, line to line, one refusal at a time to let a wrong thing stand. I wrote him back. I did not have to, and a busy commander could have let it go, and I almost did, because there is always another fire, and the day is always too short. But I thought about the 21-year-old who got championed by a man who did not have to bother, and I thought about how the not having to is exactly what made it matter. And so I sat down at the end of a long day and wrote Gunnery Sergeant Boyd Trask a short note of my own. I told him that his line was one of the safest and best run I had stepped onto in years, which was true, and that a bad joke was a small thing next to a safe range, which was also true, and that I hoped he would keep coaching the way he coached, because underneath the showman there was a real teacher, and the Corps needed real teachers more than it needed quiet men. And I told him the thing I most wanted him to keep, which was that the reason to assume every person on your line is carrying a whole life you cannot see is not politeness. It is not about being nice. It is that it is simply mechanically true, and a person who plans around what is true makes fewer mistakes than a person who plans around what is convenient to assume. I signed it with my rank, because this time the rank was part of the point, and I sent it, and I do not know what he did with it, and it is none of my business. The lesson left my hands. Where it travels now is up to him. People ask me sometimes, when I tell a piece of this story, whether I was not at least a little satisfied, whether there was not some sweetness in it. The loud man silenced, the joke turned around, the aircraft arriving on cue, like the last page of a story that pays off exactly right. And I understand the question, and I will not pretend I am made of stone. There was a flicker of it, the human flicker, the part of us that keeps score. But it burned off fast, the way the dust burned off the grass after the rotors stopped, and what was left underneath was not sweetness. It was the old grief and the old gratitude and a very tired understanding that I had spent a lifetime becoming a person who could stand in that exact moment and not need it to be sweet. That cold morning at the rail, weeks after, with my hand on the cold metal and the new name brushed and bright beside me, I was not thinking about triumph. I was thinking that a range is a place where the truth is very hard to argue with. You can decide anything you like about the person at the firing point, their gender, their clothes, their business being there, and then they send their rounds down range and the target does not care what you decided. The target only records what is true. That is why I love it. It is one of the few honest scoreboards left in the world. I have gone back to that rail more than once since. It has become a small private habit, the way people visit a grave, except the grave is a stretch of grass and a berm and a name brushed bright on a tower. I stand at the rail in the cold early light before the first relay forms, and I do not shoot, and I do not say anything out loud, and I let the whole thing settle in me. The morning it broke, the joke, and the silence after, and the aircraft, and the young lance corporal, gone the color of paper, and the gunnery sergeant holding a dead man's rifle with both hands, and finally understanding what he was holding. And the man himself, 3 years gone, who taught a shaking girl to find the still place, and never once told her what it cost him to have found it first. What I feel at the rail is not victory, and it is not anger, and it is not even really pride. It is something quieter and harder to name. It is the feeling of a debt understood. I was handed something I did not earn by a man who did not have to bother, and the only way to pay a debt like that is forward. To the next shaking 21-year-old, to the next person some loud stranger has decided is a joke. I paid a small installment on that debt the morning I let Boyd Trask keep his career and his dignity and learn his lesson at the same time. I will be paying it the rest of my life. I am at peace with that. Some debts are a privilege to carry. The placard is bolted on tight now. I checked it the last time I was there, ran my thumb along the bottom edge to feel that it was solid. The way you check a thing you love is really fastened to the world. It is. His name is on that tower for as long as the tower stands, and every relay that forms up on that line will shoot under it, most of them never knowing whose name it is, all of them the better for a lesson that came down to them through hands they will never trace. That is enough. That is, in fact, everything. So here is the one thing I will say to you directly, because you have stayed with me this long, and you have earned it. Somewhere, sometime, someone is going to decide who you are from across a firing line. They will do it fast, off your clothes, your voice, the way you carry a case they never bothered to open. They will make it loud, and other people will laugh, because laughing along is easy and standing apart is hard. When that happens, you do not owe them a speech. You do not owe them your rank or your history or the whole unseen weight of your life. You owe them nothing at all. Let the target answer. Find your natural pause, the still place between one heartbeat and the next, and do the thing you have spent your life learning to do, quietly and well, and let 5 holes in the black say what your mouth does not need to. And then when the truth has landed and the loud world has gone silent, do not stay to plant a flag in it. Walk to your own aircraft and go do the work. The end.